oikophobia, the hatred or dislike of one's own cultural home.
People are very, very gullible. People are too trusting. As a criminal, I learned to consider your humanity as a weakness to be exploited in the execution of my crimes.
Your humanity was a weakness to be exploited in the commission of his crimes. He's spelling it out for you.
In other words, your good nature, your wanting to trust people, you wanting to give people the benefit of the doubt, that gave me the opportunity to execute my crimes.
Did you know I was personally dragged into the whistleblowing about the sexual abuse, trafficking of vulnerable women at the nonprofit organization with a false accusation by the female central to my story? I had support from some famous people like...
One man told me about being beaten by the police and left permanently disabled because of a woman's false allegation.
Would this huge sigh of relief by Charlie when Trump was elected mean that he did have something to hide? That Turning Point USA did cross some lines that could land the founder and other people involved in federal prison. Have they been investigated? But we can't just operate blindly believing that this man was a saint and has never made a mistake in his life. We would be very down for doing that. So obviously, there weren't many conservative media outlets covering TPUSA and Charlie's story, so I dove into some liberal sources just to see what was being said. Here's an example of an article that did question the finances and whether TPUSA, non-profit organization, was legally able to campaign for Trump. By the way, I don't know how it was over in the US, but here, where I am, in Cyprus, honestly, we just thought that they were a political organization. I just thought they were like part of Trump's campaign. They were campaigning so hard for him. I would never think they were non-profit. I found it out later.
Hello, it's February 2026. Now, I'm going to start off by talking about something that I said I don't really want to talk about, I really don't care about. But there's something interesting that I want to simply highlight here. And this has to do with the late Charlie Kirk. Now, before I get into this, I just want to make it clear there's no malice or ill intent on my part. I never met the man, never spoke to him. I don't know him or anyone that he knows. But I want to highlight something here. And that is, I've mentioned this before, how I think it was around 2015, 2016, he would have been one of the people that I would have highlighted as what I called at the time, a rising, very quick rising online celebrity, today known as influencer. And I highlighted these types of people, including him, as a warning to others not to take the bait, and unfortunately, everyone took the bait. And I've highlighted different aspects about his rise to stardom, and more so after his passing from this world, being taken from life, and how they elevated him from being some great debater. And I've seen his stuff before, didn't really know his name, and he was mediocre at best, but anyway, I digress, to a messiah status. And it's funny, since he's been no longer here in life, how there are people who will defend him and say, oh, poor Charlie, he was among vipers, they took advantage of him, like he was a victim. And I've been telling people, there's an assumption of his being, for example, naive or innocent to everything. And I started to tell people that he was very much aware of, for example, where his money was going, the history of his wife. And again, I don't know the woman, never spoke to her, nothing. There's no malice or ill intent, just simply highlighting things that people are now starting to find out and share. And I'm not being specific here, I'm generalizing. He knew everything that was going on. And you don't get to that level. I'm going to use this as a descriptive without having to sell your soul. And I've shared over many years that I know these things from a first-hand perspective. Go watch those videos. I'm not going to reiterate all this. And I've been telling people that he was very much a player in the whole thing. He wasn't this innocent person, and they created this innocent Christian image of himself and his wife. Truths are coming out about her past. Now what we see is there are truths coming out about his life and what actually took place with Turning Point USA and those other businesses that were affiliated to that. He knew exactly what was going on. And people are now starting to try to still hang on to that innocence of him. Here's the thing, and I'll say this again. At that level, you're never going to find out. I guarantee you, the commoner, will never find out the truth. And to speculate to no end is a waste of time, which I see commoners like to do about any topic. Waste time with, trying to figure something out based on their limited knowledge base, lack of critical thinking, and not being able to separate their emotions. Something happened behind closed doors. He decided to go public thinking that it will protect him and whomever, whatever happened, and it's not what people think, decided to go public as well, and they did. They made a show of it. And this turned into a reality TV show being played mostly online, and people are taking the bait for that as well. Like it really matters. Like these people are really important in the world. Perhaps to all the people who've been donating millions and millions of dollars to the cause and to his now wife, widowed wife, sure, they might have a dog in the fight. But it really doesn't matter. None of these people matter. And you're just simply buying into it if you're following this. And yes, I kind of follow it, not because I really care. It's just to be able to know what's going on and perhaps like I'm doing now, be able to highlight something. And everything that I've said from the beginning about him is coming true. Has come true. And I want you to really think about that. How everything is a dog and pony show, clouded by smoke and mirrors, and people just go along with it because that's the commoner, the simpleton. I know I've had some people say, well, they're offended by being called the commoner. Well, simpleton is another descriptive that has been used throughout history for the commoner. So does that sound better? Now I digress. Then we get into, for example, this whole thing with Alberta, Canada. And I have a lot to say about Alberta, Canada. And watch some of my videos, things that I've exposed. Alberta is the most corrupt province, Calgary specifically. I've exposed police, judicial, political corruption, as well as the sexual abuse, trafficking of vulnerable women at nonprofit organization, a mental health organization nonetheless, which I'll get into in a moment. And people still are being psyoped into thinking that Alberta should separate. Here's the thing for naive Canadians And there are people, and I've highlighted them, for example, even in overlays over time, who have come from Central and Eastern Europe, which was, for example, under the communist regime, etc., and the former Yugoslavia was part of that as well. And what people in Canada can't see is how they're being psyoped into breaking up Canada. We see, for example, the former Yugoslavia, how that was all chopped up. We see other countries throughout modern history being chopped up. The same thing is happening here in Canada for whatever reason. And people are being sucked into something they have no idea. They're just going by emotions and listening to nonsense being spewed to them. They don't even look into, for example, the Premier of Alberta and the biases and everything else that's behind her. And I've talked about this. I've dedicated, I think, 5, maybe 6 videos to this whole topic of Alberta. And people are still going on. And these are the same people who drank the Kool-Aid about the so-called Convoy of Freedom and promote these fake heroes. And I highlighted at the time, for example, the 4 men at, I think it was Coutts, Alberta. And I've shown in videos, these 4 people are deemed heroes and all this other nonsense. All 4 of them were in the interrogation room crying like little babies wanting to be with their families. These are heroes according to the commoner. People, how easily people forget all these things. So there's 2 major events that are taking place right now that in North America, the whole Western culture is being dismantled, but that's a different topic. And there's a guy who was a former literal Green Beret who specialized in something called unconventional warfare. And I've known about this for a long time. And he's talking about, for example, we're going to now go into what's happening in the United States, specifically, say, with Minneapolis and all these so-called protesters and everything else, and how that's all being played out. And he's saying himself, what's happening with that alone is from the same type of playbook that they used when he was with the military to dismantle, break apart other countries. He says for him, it's clear as day. And people, the commoner, who thinks they're smarter than they are, who have some sort of divine discernment, can't even see it. They just play along with it. Now, in all these cases, whether it be Charlie Kirk, this Alberta thing, or even these anti-ICE protesters who have completely gone off the rails, think about this for a second. I'm just going to segue. They're going after people who are protecting them, protecting their country. Just let that sink in. But anyway. But in these scenarios, yes, there are paid actors who go in and deliberately disrupt. Now, I've mentioned over 10 years now, over a decade, John Perkins, the economic man, and how he talks about how they would go into different countries with a few $1 million and wipe out the country by paying the people to do so. So you have those people. You have the people who are opposed them. Now you have the people in between who are going to sway one way or the other. And it seems like everything else in this world, pineapple on pizza, there's a divide. And this is causing tension and everything else. what's happening with all these things, they're distractions, they're psyops, and the commoners is being led by the nose, this way, that way, in every single way, and they're really too stupid to see anything. And the commoner actually thinks that they're the best people to make decisions for example, with a vote. The people controlling the narrative, the controlling everything, they're not going to leave it to chance by how the commoner is going to vote, because they know the commoner is not that smart. There's a difference here, and I've mentioned this before. Individuals may be smart, but as a collective, dumb as a bag of nails. And when people start getting together on any topic, on any position, they're dumb as a bag of nails. And they get dumber and dumber as more and more people gather together. And there's a lot of studies, a lot of actual studies about this type of thing. Now, the psychology is being used against the people. Now, I've highlighted psychology, for example, the fraud that it is. And it's not just me saying it. There's many people within the profession, so-called profession, of these quacks who are coming out saying, yeah, it's all nonsense. And I've talked to, for example, over the years, people who are getting into post-secondary to study shrinkology, and they're all gung-ho about it. But more and more now, by the time they get halfway to the end, are saying this is all nonsense. And it's really interesting starting to see more and more of these people now doing videos who are students of the so-called profession, really calling it out large. And they're saying the very same types of things that I've been saying for probably about 15 years, and other people who've been saying things a lot longer. For example, David Rosenhan. I've highlighted the Rosenhan experiment plenty of times. Now, there is a psychology part of this, is understanding, for example, how people will react to certain situations, say under pressure, and so forth. Like when you look at the experiments, like the Milgram, the Ash experiment, the Stanford experiments. You have, for example, the Stockholm syndrome, all these things. Psyops are using, for example, the understanding on how human beings react or could react, not all, most, and they calculate, for example, if doing a psyop, people who are not going to be affected by it and everything else. But I don't want to, that's getting a little bit too deep here in this video. But there is a psychology being used against people, and we see this with these examples that I've started off this video talking about, to manipulate people. And when you look at, for example, the studies made famous by Julia Shaw in Planting False Memories, how easy it is to manipulate people, you really got to sit back and take note of this. And I've said in fairly recent videos, the best way to, or gave some examples of the best way to counter all this, is to detach from everything. One of the biggest things is not to find yourself identifying with anything. Hard to do, but very possible. Takes discipline. And the more you can do that, and as a descriptive, look at, evaluate everything from that's going on in the world from a third party perspective, that puts you in the advantage seat. And then you start to see how things are being played out. You know, it's very interesting, even over the years, say for example in comment sections, a long time ago I would just have everything copied and pasted. Like I would type everything. I got tired of typing the same thing over and over. And even now people are saying, oh, you're saying this, you just say the same type of thing, whether I copy and paste or whether I draft a fresh comment. And my reply is because I'm having the people are saying the same types of things, and I'm having to reply the same way to each. It's not that I'm being repetitive by choice, it's because everyone ranting on in comment sections are saying the same thing over and over. And they're very predictable. So I'm going to reply the same way. And of course, people don't note that I'm replying the same reply because people are saying the same type of thing. And I tell you, I'll give you a little insight here about me. Say, for example, in the comment section, and I've actually done this with people, say they're part of the same group. So in private messaging, I'll say, okay, this is what they're going to say next, and this is going to be my reply. And I'll go through real quick, maybe 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. I said, just watch, because they're in that group too. They're reading the comments, and exactly what I said they're going to say, they've said, and I reply. And sometimes there might be a possibility of a tangent. So I'll say, okay, they're either going to go this way or this way, and this is how I'm going to reply. And if it goes this other way, then they're just going to start calling me names and everything else. And every single time I've been correct, because people are that predictable. So just to sum everything up here, there is part of the psychology being used against people with regards to how they perceive, for example, the late Charlie Kirk. Again, I have nothing against the man. And what's going on with his businesses and everything else, what's going on with this nonsense with Alberta separating or becoming the 51st state and all this other nonsense, what's happening with these, really they're riots, not protests, in the United States, specifically, say at this time, Minneapolis and everything else. All these things are distractions. And again, I'm going to say, don't get sucked into it. Detach yourself from everything. Don't build your identity on anything. You'll survive it. That's all I really have to say. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
Yeah. And I can see, it feels like a third party is out there and talking to somebody. And I see from what I'm seeing on the ground, I see myself. I see somebody out there talking to them, giving them advice, giving them my ideas, giving them the playbook, instructing them where to go. And it's a level of sophistication that is through the roof as far as like unconventional warfare goes. I have total respect for what I'm seeing on the ground as far as if it was my playbook and I was running it that way, it's going really, really well.
Studying psychology has been the single most disappointing thing I have done in my life. You go to university, you go to your lectures, you talk to some of these people, and I'm sorry, after multiple interactions, you come to ask yourself, how have some of these people survived? How have they survived up until this point in their life? You know, some of these people, they cannot tell their left from their right. You know, go ahead, graduate, get into your profession, and try saying that shit Please, just because you score high on exams, just because you do well in your questionnaire, just because you do well in your coursework, in your dissertation, that does not qualify you. It doesn't put you in a position of power. Doesn't put you psychologically above someone else.
This is where it gets darker. Soldiers who broke down were subjected to treatment designed to shame them back to sanity. British doctor Louis Yealand pioneered a technique using electric shocks. He would strap men to chairs and apply electrical current to their throats, jaws, and tongues, while shouting at them to speak or to walk. Sessions lasted hours. Men would scream and vomit from the pain, but Yealand insisted this was therapeutic. He published case studies bragging about how quickly he could cure mutism. What he was actually doing was torturing traumatized men.
Just remember, I was one man against many. Fighting a losing battle, but I still fought to the end.
That means press on. That means endure. That means God cannot fail, and you're not going to give up. That's not an option for a child of God. This means you are going to be remembered. Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, when is it going to get easier? When you die.